so Yama everybody. Gaya Yaniga Banda Yama Nema Gura Puma Uralio Bara. Nagaya Wurigai Mianjin Yagara Turable Yuan Bara Yaniga Bara Diliga Yina Birala Bira Barawan. So I'd like to acknowledge country. So I'm a proud Urali Kuma woman from a place called Gaduga, which has been voted the most boringest town over and over in Australia. But there's some pretty good people that come out of it, including some very strong Aboriginal activists, namely my uncle Michael Anderson, who established the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Canberra. So boring might equal creative, who knows? But I would like to also acknowledge the country and lands that you're all on today. So I'm down here in Sydney on the beautiful Gadigal lands of the Yuin Nation. And I just wanted to put this, this Indigenous or Aboriginal Australia map up here, just to show you that every single footstep an inch of land in this country was cared for and looked after by Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples. And off the back of our recent referendum, I think that the health and well-being of a lot of people moving forward, may be compromised. So I just think it's really nice to remember that, you know, this is a beautiful, rich culture of over 65,000 years of us looking after this place. Okay, so just very quickly, I'm just going to set the scene for why we have like particular guidelines around working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I also want to give you a case study that gives a really, I think, strong self-determining overview of how you can work in this space and achieve great things. And so this is just a very, very quick 30-second snapshot of the history of this country post-contact in 1788. But there's been a lot of policies that have been placed over Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that have really impacted on identity. And identity, in the way that we describe who we are, is our spirit. So it's our soul, it's who we are. And I would say that's the same for everybody that's online today as well. You know, if you think about who you are, it makes up what you are. And so we have fallen behind in all areas of health. And I was really interested in the previous speaker. I only came in at the end because I was trying to squeeze some money out of the health minister. But yes, cervical screening and how important that is. And, you know, the rates of women that die, Aboriginal women that die from that because of access is, like much higher than what it should be. So bit of a history lesson. I won't take you through this. I could spend an hour just talking about it alone. But what I wanted to do today is just take you through two really quick case studies of research that I have led, and also to just draw your attention to what the Indigenous Research Excellence criteria is within NHMRC, which is the space that I predominantly play in, but likewise how that intersects with ethics committees within HHSs as well, and more broadly. And so you'll see up here on the screen that there's 4 main criteria. So community engagement, benefit, and that's the benefit to the community, not benefit back to researchers or to funding providers. So it's what do we actually provide that's going to be reciprocated and beneficial to communities. Sustainability and transferability, and also building capacity. So these main areas are what really sit at the forefront of the work that I do. And because I am an Aboriginal researcher, I have a big cultural load that needs to actually follow the work that I do, because I'm actually working with my people and for my people. So back in 2014, I had a new boss show up. So I used to work in rural health and I was working in a rural medical school. And this guy was like a John Wayne character. He was an endocrinologist and he darkened my doorway one day and said, "Are you Toombsy?" And Gordon calls me Toombsy too, by the way. But "Are you Toombsy?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "We're going to do some research together." And I'm thinking, who are you? And what are you talking about? But he ended up being this very colourful, often inappropriate type of a character. And when we were with Mob, I'd say, just sit there and don't say anything until you learn how to be culturally appropriate. And we worked with a great combo. But I said that the only way I was going to be a researcher in any way, shape or form is if I actually did work that was with community and not sort of baked up by a researcher who said, "I think this is a really good idea." And so I spent 2 weeks yarning with communities across southeast Queensland and into northern New South Wales. And overwhelmingly, what people were talking about was access and lack of, and that the rates of suicide in communities and the prevalence of mental health issues was off the Richter scale. And when I started to explore these things, I found that there was no baseline to even start with, and we're talking about 2014. And so after this particular driving trip, I applied for my first NHMRC grant. No real track record, but I had my John Wayne character, the endocrinologist, and these big track records who actually put me out front and stood behind me, and I haven't looked back. We've been able to do some really great work. And so I just want to take you through these really quickly because I want you to see how you can link those 4 criteria back to what I'm taking you through. So that very first grant that we got was pure prevalence of common mental disorders in communities, Aboriginal communities in southeast and southwest Queensland. They asked for this, so therefore we delivered. And what we were essentially asking people to do is to sign up for a diagnostic interview, so gold standard, using the DSM, to diagnose these participants with a common mental disorder. And I just kept on challenging community and saying, "Look, this is what you've asked for, so this is what we have to do." And over 544 participants signed up to be interviewed around their own mental health. And we found that the results of that were quite astounding. And the previous kind of ABS data had said that Aboriginal people's mental health was about 2.5 times higher than the national average, and our results yielded a lot higher result at 6.4-fold. And we couldn't get that paper published or those results published in Australia because we kept getting rejected by journals that was saying, "Hey, can't you give us some good news?" And it's like, well, it's actually a prevalence study, so no, we can't. And anyway, but these are the results. And the benefit back to community around this stuff was we were able to get some serious funding into local Aboriginal medical services to support the psychosocial and the mental health prevalence that we were seeing. But likewise, the NDIS was just coming into place during this time as well. And a lot of people were able to use their diagnosis as a way to get support. So through NDIS and into psychology services and other points of care. Likewise, with this training, we had Aboriginal health workers that were assisting us. And at the end of this project, 3 of those 5 Aboriginal health workers went into university and started to do their own degrees because they sat in a space where they felt culturally safe, and we were able to support them in that space. And here's one of my beautiful recruiters, Margie, who is doing a social work degree. All right, and then the second one here is around, and it's actually international suicide intervention training program that developed in southwest Queensland as well, off the back of people saying that, you know, the rates of suicide in Aboriginal communities was unacceptable. And just to give you an idea, in Cherbourg alone in 2021, there were 11 suicides. No mechanism for proper support in that space. And so we went about developing a what's called a gatekeeper training program. So where you're in community in real time at 2 a.m. in the morning, people are trained in those communities. So there's no reliance on fly in, fly out. And an auntie said to me back in 2015, our kids don't kill themselves between the hours of 9 and 5. We need something that we can do in real time, not relying on other communities or other organisations to actually come in and help us. So within the pilot study, we trained over 600 people, and we did 140 interventions in the first 3 months. And an intervention is actually following a suicide safety plan with somebody and talking directly about them, about their suicide ideation. The federal government brought out a sort of a calculation around what one suicide costs the taxpayer, which I hate talking about, but it's just pertinent to this degree in that one suicide costs about $4 million. So if you calculate 140 interventions or prevented suicides by $4 million, our $840,000 grant punched way above its weight in this space. 77% of people had a personal experience with suicide, and we're finding that those rates were probably underestimated. And apparently this is a big thing cited in the NICE international guidelines. I didn't even know what they were. I looked them up and thought, oh, that's pretty impressive. So anyway, here we are today. So we have trained, we have collaborated and iteratively developed the ISS program with over 90 communities nationally. We have taken this program into Canada and the US as well, and they're really interested in how they can do a very similar type of program over there as well. We've trained over 6,000 people to date, and we've conducted that number there of interventions isn't correct because it keeps on going up and up and up. But yeah, but I think, I'm not sure how much time I've got, Gordon. What have I got?
Maree, you've got 13 minutes in total, so
I can keep going. This is
yeah,
great.
yeah, keep going. Yeah, we'll leave 5 minutes for questions. So
okay, alrighty. So this is the protocol that we developed, and going back to the Indigenous Research Excellence criteria for NHMRC, which is really the foundation for good ethics anyway. We developed this ISS protocol. So this is about making sure that when we go into communities that we're actually doing the right thing at the get-go, and we're not causing harm. So we're talking about suicide in terms of what this diagram is, but we're also wanting to empower people. And, you know, suicide is a really, really hard subject, and I probably should have said it at the get-go. We're talking about suicide here, and I hope that everybody online is okay with this. So I talk about this like I am changing my socks because I'm so used to it. But just know that the work that we've done has been so empowering and so enriching. So the community engagement piece, which is one of the main criteria for the HREC, is what the first part of this protocol is about. And so we spend up to 2 to 3 months actually engaging with communities before we go in to deliver the training. And the reason for that is sometimes it takes us at least a month to get through the not-for-profit organisations and all these sort of gatekeepers who are quite protective about their space. And I call it cracking the concrete, but getting past that to actually get in underneath that to the community. And the community are the people that live in these spaces and places 24/7. They're not your fly-in, fly-outs, and they're often not your stakeholders either in terms of funders. And so trying to get to those people takes quite a lot of time. But over the years, we're getting better at it because, yeah, we'll get a connection from someone, go to them, and then we can get in underneath, you know, this kind of concrete that sits above it. During that time, we set up the conversation around why we're coming in, and we're 99% of the time we're actually invited in anyway. But we want to know what supports those communities need. So what's going to be the benefit to the community for us doing this? How are we going to support the community by going in? And also that reciprocity piece also, which is, what do you need and what resources can we provide you and what remuneration do you need within this community to engage, for example, a translator if we're in a remote community, or you know, we might need a traditional healer to be at the training. We pay those people, so we don't just come in and take. We set up these support mechanisms in a way that everybody is taken care of. And our funders are now starting to understand that if they want to fund an I-assist workshop, it's not a 2-day fly-in, fly-out. And so we price it out to make sure that it fits the model that you see in front of you. So we're not setting people up to fail. Then we do the workshop where we have a community connection day, which is a half day where people can opt in or opt out of the training because it's just a tough subject. We don't want to re-traumatise people or traumatise them even more. It's also a space and a place to get people to connect with each other. So often communities are complex places and spaces, and they're hard to navigate because a lot of mob or Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people have all just been thrown together in a way that culturally we were not meant to be. So when I showed you that map of Australia with all of the different countries or language groups, we have our own autonomy. And if you think about Aboriginal Australia and you think about Europe, for example, I think there's 48 countries in Europe. We have we have 250. So making sure that the way that we interconnect and understand each other in those spaces is really important to make sure we achieve the best results we can in the training. So that half-day community connection piece is about that. And sometimes it's about leaving your cultural nuances at the door and coming in as a group to work towards saving people's lives. And we've never had an instance where that has not happened because this is core business, keeping people alive. Then we have our training over 2 days, which is really building people's confidence in how to ask the question about suicide, noticing what it looks like, which are things that are very intuitive to Aboriginal people. We notice things. We see body language, we pick up on that. We often don't ask what's going on. So this is about directly asking, what are you thinking about suicide? Like pretty confronting types of questions. Initially, when we started this, mob didn't like the directness of it. And the way that we've got around that is to explain that this actually isn't an Aboriginal disease. So prior to contact, there was no word for suicide in any Aboriginal language that we can find. And the first reported suicide in this country was in 1961. And the numbers just keep going up and up and up. So in our youth, we have some of the highest rates in the world per capita. the final part of what we do is this ongoing support, and that's really about how do we keep communities connected with each other. So peer support mechanism. We also provide engagement opportunities online, and we go back to communities to make sure that the resources are there and people are getting what they need. And we provide ongoing training for our trainers. So this is a social enterprise model as well. So when we think about benefit, we've trained about, I think we're up to about 22 train the trainers, and they sit in these communities and they chase the funding to deliver these workshops. So we're providing employment opportunities for people as well. And this is just the overview of our structure. You'll notice when you put ethics in within anything to do with Indigenous peoples, you'll be asked about governance. And, you know, it's a requirement these days to have a governance group that sit over the project that you're doing if it's specifically Indigenous focused, and that governance group provides support and in some ways mentorship, but also, you know, they can slap you around a bit if you're doing the wrong thing as well. You're making sure that you're doing the right thing and you're complying with the expectations of how to work in this space. And then, yeah, this is a breakdown of we have a national manager who also does quality assurance. We have a national trainer, and you'll see there it's a social enterprise, and this community connections piece is what I was on the Zoom with the Minister for Health about. How do we set up a national suicide and mental health and wellbeing connection space? So where can people jump in and get really good support? All right, Natasha's jumped back on, which makes me think I'm out of time. So I will leave it there. But yeah, have we got time for any questions, Natasha?
Yeah, that's why I jumped on, because I know people want to ask some questions. Maree, thank you very much
All right.
for your presentation.
No
it was great. Gordon has a question.
Hello, Toomsy. Thanks a lot for that. Appreciate your effort. Hope you got some money.
No worries, Gordo.
Very good.
What's
very
that?
Good. Just a question about cultural appropriateness, Maree, and I know one of the researchers up here in Queensland is doing one of these psilocybin studies for treatment-resistant depression, and there have been people say to her about, well, we don't feel like taking part because it's not culturally appropriate. So you can get over that in large part by virtue of the fact you are Indigenous and your team is Indigenous. But how do we get over this cultural appropriateness in terms of research for things like suicide, which is so crucial?
Well, I think it's about working out what cultural appropriate actually means. And so, in my space, Aboriginal people would say that culturally appropriate, that suicide is not a culturally appropriate thing to be talking about. So, and that was a big barrier in terms of what you're just mentioning around treatments around mental health. We see that differently as well. So, somebody with mania, for example, in a Western world would be held up as a healer in a traditional Aboriginal community. So I think it's about understanding both sides. And there's this beautiful methodology called the third cultural space, which is where you have Western knowledges and Indigenous knowledges, and they come together, but there's this piece in the middle. It's like the allyship piece where you work out what's actually going to work in the space, but you need a really long runway for that stuff. And I think that's something that we need to think about in this research space, that front end of, weaving people's stories, so the Western story and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stories into the work that needs to be done to come up with a co-design that actually is going to work for everybody. And I know NHMRC, I sit on one of their Indigenous Health Caucus, and we're talking about extending our grants out, 5, even 7 years, because there's now a really strong understanding of getting that front end piece right. And that's some of these things that are coming up, I'm sure, in the conversations here. But it's important work.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Maree. It's a good point about you need a long lead time to make sure, because these conversations are not simple. And I think as ethics committees, I guess we need to know that these have taken place, or ensure they do. Thank you for your response.
No worries.